Imagine boarding a plane with your children, expecting nothing more than a quiet journey across the Atlantic. But what if, before you even settle into your seat, the very people meant to ensure your safety begin treating you like a threat? What if every word you speak, every item you carry, every look you give is twisted into suspicion? This is what happened to Dr. Malik Harrington, a respected neurosurgeon, traveling with his teenage son and daughter. What should have been an ordinary flight turned into a storm of humiliation, bias, and confrontation 35,000 feet in the air. A flight attendant's false accusations escalated into a full-blown spectacle security codes called bag searched, dignity stripped. But what the crew never expected was that this family's quiet strength would ignite a movement, witnessed by every passenger, recorded on every phone, and carried to the world below. How far would a father go to protect his children's dignity? What happens when witnesses refuse to stay silent? And how can one night on a plane change an entire industry? Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a second of this powerful story. Let's begin. The terminal windows glowed with the fading light of late afternoon. Streaks of orange and violet scattered across the glass as the Harrington family approached their gate. Dr. Malik Harrington walked with a steady grace, his posture upright, his steps deliberate, like a man carrying both memory and responsibility. To his right strode his son, Orion, tall and sharp-jawed, carrying a worn leather backpack filled with law books and case notes. On the other side was Selah, his daughter, slim, thoughtful, clutching a journal that had belonged to her mother. Paris was more than just a destination. For Malik, it was a promise kept. His late wife, Danica, had always dreamed of returning there with the twins once they were grown, to walk the same bridges where they had first fallen in love. When cancer had taken her 3 years earlier, Malik swore he would carry her memory across the ocean. This trip was their tribute, their way of saying love never really ends. It only changes form. The boarding gate buzzed with the usual chorus of rolling suitcases and scattered conversations. Overhead, announcements called passengers to line up by zones, while children clutched stuffed animals and business travelers hunched over phones. Malik glanced at the twins, saw the faint nerves in Selah's eyes, and offered a reassuring smile. "You two ready?" he asked softly. Orion nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." "Paris is waiting," Selah whispered, almost like a prayer. "I just want Mom to be proud of us." Malik reached out, resting his hand briefly on her shoulder. "She already is. This trip isn't about pride. It's about presence. Carry her with you, and you'll never be alone." The line for first class was shorter, roped off with polished stanchions. Malik carried their boarding passes ready on his phone, but the gate attendant barely glanced before waving them forward. The carpeted jet bridge smelled faintly of fuel and recycled air, the sound of footsteps hollow against metal walls. Inside the cabin, the lighting shifted to a soft glow, designed to calm travelers before takeoff. Rows of wide leather seats stretched ahead, each with a folded blanket, a pillow, and a small tray of welcome snacks. Passengers were already settling in, sipping champagne, arranging laptops. As Malik helped Selah stow her bag, he caught a flicker of a look from one of the flight attendants stationed near the galley. She was tall, blonde hair pulled tight into a severe bun. Her lips pressed into a thin line as her eyes lingered on the family longer than necessary. The badge pinned neatly to her uniform read, "Claudine Mercer." Malik was no stranger to those kinds of looks. In his career, he had been stared at in operating rooms, board meetings, even restaurants where waiters second-guessed his credit card. He had learned the art of breathing through it, of holding his ground without raising his voice. But on an airplane, with his children beside him, the stakes always felt higher. Selah slid into her seat by the window, tracing her finger along the armrest, trying to distract herself with the cabin's details. The glossy magazine tucked in the pouch, the cool air from the overhead vent. Orion sat in the middle, adjusting his earbuds before pulling them out again, restless. Malik took the aisle seat, a silent wall between his children and the unpredictable world beyond. A younger attendant, dark-haired with an easy smile, approached with a tray of sparkling water and orange juice. "Welcome aboard, folks," he said warmly. His name tag read Diego Ramos. "Can I get you something to start?" Orion asked for orange juice. Selah whispered water. "Please." And Malik requested tea. Diego nodded, efficient but kind, leaving a small ripple of ease behind him. But not everyone carried that same energy. Claudine returned, glancing at Malik's phone, then at the twins. Her expression was polite but tight, like a mask pulled too hard. "Boarding passes again." "Please," she said flatly. Malik tilted his head. "We already scanned at the gate." "Yes," Claudine replied, "but I need to verify seating. There's been confusion sometimes." She let the last word hang, as though it contained more than she wanted to admit. Orion stiffened, ready to object. But Malik gently touched his arm. He handed over the passes without a word, maintaining his calm. Claudine studied them longer than necessary, then returned them with a clipped smile. "Thank you," she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. As she walked away, Orion muttered, "Why us nobody else in this cabin got asked twice." Selah shifted uncomfortably. "Just ignore it." But Malik heard the edge in both their voices, the old wound resurfacing in a new place. He took a slow breath, centering himself. His children needed more than his outrage. They needed his steadiness. "Listen," he said quietly, leaning closer so only they could hear. "We know who we are. We don't have to prove it to anyone with a badge or a clipboard. Sometimes dignity is the most radical thing you can hold on to." Orion looked down, chewing on the words, and Selah closed her eyes, taking strength from the reminder. The cabin filled as more passengers arrived, an older couple clutching travel pillows, a businessman with noise-canceling headphones, a young woman tapping furiously at her laptop. Overhead bins clicked shut. Engines hummed faintly beneath the floor. Malik glanced once more at the folded photo tucked inside Selah's journal. It showed Danica, smiling wide in front of the Eiffel Tower, hair whipping in the wind. The image was grainy, faded, but alive in a way that broke his heart and healed it at the same time. "This is for you," he thought silently. "We're carrying you back." As the cabin crew prepared for pushback, Malik felt the shift in the air, the anticipation of travel, the tightening of seat belts, the hush before flight. He also felt something else, something colder, in the way Claudine Mercer's gaze returned to them from across the aisle. It was only the beginning. The hum of the engines deepened as the aircraft door closed with a firm metallic thud. The aisle narrowed with the shuffle of passengers adjusting bags and the clipped footsteps of attendants pacing the cabin. Dr. Malik Harrington leaned back into his seat, adjusting his belt, willing himself to breathe slow. The trip had only begun, but already something in his gut tightened. A quiet warning he had learned not to ignore. Claudine Mercer reappeared in the aisle, moving from row to row with an expression that seemed carved from stone. She smiled at one couple, checked on another passenger, and then stopped directly at Malik's row. Her eyes flicked to Orion and Selah, lingering just long enough to turn courtesy into something sharper. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the same clipped efficiency as before. "I'll need to confirm your tickets again." Orion's head jerked upward. "Again? We already gave them to you twice." Her eyes narrowed. "I understand, sir, but there have been errors in seating assignments. Just following procedure." Malik's jaw tightened. He could feel Orion's pulse rising beside him, the way his son's voice was ready to break into fire. He gently pressed a hand against Orion's arm. "It's fine," Malik said, sliding the phone back out. "Here they are." Claudine inspected the screen as if she were searching for something invisible, scanning each line with unnecessary slowness. Her lips pursed. Then she finally handed the device back. "Thank you," she said again, though her tone was stripped of warmth. As she walked away, Orion muttered low enough for only his family to hear, "She didn't do that to the man in 1C, or the couple behind us, just us." Selah shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with the edge of her sweater sleeve. "Maybe she's just thorough." Orion shook his head, his voice edged with frustration. "Or maybe she just sees us as suspects, not passengers." Malik closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with deliberate calm. He turned toward both of his children, lowering his tone to something steady, something that might anchor them. "People will project their fears and their prejudices. That's their burden, not ours. We decide whether we let it stain us." Selah's voice quivered. "But it feels like she's trying to humiliate us, in front of everyone." "I know," Malik whispered. "But remember what your mother used to say. The most powerful answer to disrespect is dignity. Sometimes dignity feels heavier than anger, but it lasts longer, too." Selah nodded slowly, clutching her journal closer. Orion looked unconvinced, but he kept quiet. Diego Ramos returned a moment later with their drinks. His smile broke the tension like sunlight through a cloud. "Here you go. Tea for you, sir. Orange juice and water for the twins." "Anything else before takeoff?" Malik thanked him, his gratitude genuine. Diego's warmth was small but grounding, proof that not everyone in uniform carried the same hardness. As they sipped their drinks, Claudine passed by again, this time stopping at Selah's seat. She glanced at the overhead bin, then at the backpack tucked under the seat. "That bag looks a bit large," she said flatly. Selah blinked, startled. "It's just a laptop and my notebook. May I see it?" Claudine's tone carried no suggestion, only demand. Before Selah could respond, Malik stepped in. Her bag was screened at security and cleared at the gate. "Is there a problem?" Claudine's lips thinned. "We've had instances of improper storage. It's standard to check." Malik's voice stayed calm, but his eyes did not move. "There's nothing improper about a backpack under a seat." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Claudine finally gave a curt nod and moved on, her shoes clicking against the floor. Selah exhaled shakily. "Why does it feel like she's searching for something that isn't there?" Orion answered grimly. "Because she is." Malik felt the air in the cabin grow heavier. Other passengers were beginning to notice. A businessman across the aisle raised an eyebrow but looked away. A young woman in row 3 shot the family a sympathetic glance, though she said nothing. Malik's thoughts wandered briefly, unwillingly, to Danica. He wondered what she would have said in this moment. Probably something like, "Breathe, Malik. Let them show who they are, while you show who you are." He heard her voice in memory, and for a moment his shoulders eased. But Orion was not his father. His son's jaw was tight, his knuckles clenched against his armrest. Malik could almost hear the inner monologue pulsing inside him. "This is exactly what I'll be fighting against one day. the rules bent, the rights ignored, just because of skin. Orion wanted to stand up, to quote statutes, to challenge the absurdity. But another part of him, younger and still raw, feared that raising his voice would only confirm their worst suspicions, that if he defended himself too loudly, the label would shift from passenger to problem. Selah's struggle was different. She felt the weight of eyes, the whispers she imagined behind her. Shame pressed down heavier than anger. She wanted to disappear into the window, to melt into the clouds outside, but at the same time, she wanted to prove she belonged, to show the degrees she was pursuing, the brilliance she had earned. Why doesn't anyone see that first? Why do they see threat before they see me? Malik glanced at both of them, sensing their silent wars. His heart ached, but he stayed rooted in his calm. He had spent decades learning to fight battles in operating rooms where panic cost lives. Now that training became armor here. "Eyes on me," he murmured softly to his children. They turned. "This flight is not going to define us. We define us." The announcement chime interrupted, signaling takeoff preparations. Claudine's voice filled the speakers, her professional tone polished, almost soothing to anyone not watching her closely. But to the Harringtons, the contradiction between words and actions felt sharp. As the plane pushed back, Malik stared out the window, watching ground crew move like shadows across the tarmac. His reflection in the glass showed a man carrying more than luggage. He wondered if Paris would feel like relief, or just another reminder of what they carried everywhere. The aircraft taxied, engines roaring louder, cabin lights dimming. Malik reached over, squeezing Selah's hand gently, then Orion's. The twins squeezed back, a silent pact forged in tension. The nose lifted. Gravity pressed them into their seats, and the city below fell away. They were airborne, suspended between earth and sky. But Malik knew. The true turbulence had nothing to do with weather. It had already begun inside the cabin. The climb to cruising altitude smoothed into a steady hum, the kind of sound that normally lulled passengers into comfort. Overhead bins were sealed, seat belts clicked, and cabin lights softened to a dim glow. In first class, attendants moved with choreographed precision, handing out warm towels and menus. The small details of air travel often mark the difference between feeling welcomed and feeling dismissed. For the Harrington family, those details were about to become the battlefield. Claudine Mercer returned with a tray of beverages. Her movements were sharp, deliberate, every glass set down with a controlled grace that almost concealed her tension. She served the older couple in row 1 with a smile that looked rehearsed, then moved down the aisle. When she reached Selah, something shifted. The tray tilted ever so slightly, and in a single instant, a stream of cranberry juice spilled across Selah's white sweater. The red spread quickly, seeping into fabric, blooming like a wound. Selah gasped, instinctively pulling back. "Oh my God!" Claudine set the tray down with exaggerated calm. "Apologies," she said flatly. "Accidents happen." Malik was on his feet in an instant, his hand steady as he reached for napkins, blotting Selah's sweater while she sat frozen, eyes wide with humiliation. He could hear the murmurs from nearby passengers, feel the weight of their stares. His daughter, who had been so careful to carry her mother's journal, to sit with quiet dignity, now sat marked by a stain that refused to be ignored. Selah's voice trembled. "It's ruined?" Claudine crossed her arms. "We can provide a voucher for dry cleaning." Her tone lacked sincerity, lacked even the faintest recognition of what she had just inflicted. To anyone else, it might have been an accident, but Malik caught the flicker in her eyes, the absence of surprise, the satisfaction that passed like a shadow. Orion's jaw tightened. That wasn't an accident. You aimed at her. Excuse me. Claudine's voice carried the mock indignation of someone daring to be challenged. You heard me, Orion said. Louder this time. You've been targeting us since we boarded. You've checked our tickets 3 times, questioned our bags, and now this. Don't act like it's coincidence. Claudine stiffened. Her eyes darted to other passengers as if to recruit their silence. Sir, I don't appreciate accusations. Perhaps you should calm yourself. Malik raised a hand, signaling Orion to stop before words became weapons. He met Claudine's gaze, his own voice low but unshakable. My daughter is soaked. She deserves more than a dry cleaning voucher. She deserves respect. For a moment, the aisle froze. Diego Ramos approached quickly, sensing the tension. His expression softened when he saw Cela's stained sweater. Miss, are you all right? Let me grab some club soda and towels. Cela nodded faintly, though her cheeks burned crimson. Diego hurried off, returning with supplies, kneeling at her side to help dab the fabric. His kindness contrasted so sharply with Claudine's indifference that the difference became impossible to ignore. Passengers across the aisle whispered. One woman muttered, That didn't look accidental. A man behind them shook his head, pulling out his phone. Though he did not record yet, Malik sat back slowly, watching his daughter press the wet towel against her chest. He felt his anger coil deep inside, a pressure threatening to break. But he would not give Claudine the satisfaction of seeing him explode. He had spent too many years training his body to stay steady under pressure, hands that did not tremble even when a life depended on them. His children needed that steadiness now more than ever. Cela's inner storm was harder to contain. She felt as though every eye in the cabin was dissecting her. Not just the stain, but her skin, her very presence. She remembered her mother's gentle reminders that some people would never see beyond the surface, that prejudice was an old ghost still haunting new places, but knowing it and feeling it were different things. In that moment, she felt smaller than her seat, swallowed by shame she had not earned. Orion's anger simmered dangerously. His thoughts raced, drafting courtroom arguments he had not yet been trained to make. This is discrimination. This is hostile treatment. This is humiliation by design. He wanted to stand, to demand the captain's attention, to force accountability right there in the aisle. But his father's quiet hand on his arm kept him grounded, pulling him back from the cliff. Patience, Malik whispered, barely audible. Not silence. Patience. Claudine collected her tray with a crisp motion, her voice sharp as she said, If you need further assistance, press the call button. She turned away without another glance. The moment lingered long after she left. Diego returned once more, placing a bottle of water on Cela's tray. His voice was gentle, careful. She shouldn't have handled it that way. I'm sorry. Cela gave him a grateful nod, though words failed her. Malik finally leaned back, his chest rising slowly, his mind caught in a war of restraint. He thought of Paris, of Danica's smile in that photograph, and clung to it like a rope pulling him through turbulence. He would not let this flight destroy what they had come here to honor. But he knew this was no longer just about one spilled drink. It was a message, whether Claudine admitted it or not. As the plane leveled off above the clouds, the stain on Cela's sweater darkened and dried. It became a symbol, visible not just to them, but to the entire cabin, a mark of the hostility they carried with them through the air. Diego paused on his way back to the galley, leaning closer to Malik. Dr. Harrington, he said quietly, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. What happened wasn't right. Malik nodded, gratitude flashing briefly in his eyes. Thank you. Sometimes the smallest kindness means the most. Diego moved on, leaving Malik with his children. The silence between them carried more weight than words. Orion tapped his foot against the floor, restless energy crackling through him. Salah stared out the window, the curve of the horizon blurring through unshed tears. Malik reached across the armrest, taking both of their hands in his. He held them there, grounding them as he whispered, "We are not defined by what is thrown at us. We are defined by how we rise after." The twins held on tightly, drawing strength from his calm. But inside, Malik's own heart was heavy. He knew this was only the beginning. The red stain on white fabric would not be forgotten. It would become the first crack in the facade, the sign that what had started as subtle bias was now transforming into open hostility. And deep inside, Malik understood a truth he wished he did not. The plane was flying smooth, but their journey had entered dangerous turbulence. The cabin lights dimmed further as dinner service began. Trays rolled down the aisle with silverware, clinking softly against porcelain. Aromas of roasted chicken and pasta filled the air, but the Harrington family barely noticed. Selah kept glancing at the dark stain on her sweater, pulling her hair forward to cover it. Orion tapped his fingers against the armrest. Restless energy coiled tight inside him. Malik sat still, watching the attendants move, measuring every interaction with quiet precision. Claudine Mercer returned, her steps brisk, her posture radiating authority. She stopped at their row again, this time with a clipboard in hand. Her smile was absent, her tone clipped. "I need to see your identification cards," she said. Orion blinked, incredulous. "Again, you already checked our tickets 3 times. This is different," Claudine replied. "The system flagged a discrepancy." Malik raised his eyebrows slightly. What kind of discrepancy? Claudine did not answer directly. "Standard verification. Sir, please hand over your IDs." Passengers nearby shifted in their seats, sensing tension. The businessman across the aisle lowered his magazine, while the woman in row 3 subtly angled her phone, perhaps recording. Malik kept his voice even. "You are singling us out. No one else in this cabin is being asked for repeated identification." Claudine's tone hardened. "I am following protocol." Orion leaned forward, unable to hold back. "Protocol, I've read the airline manual. There is no protocol that says a passenger has to hand over ID after boarding unless there is a security risk. Are you saying we're a risk?" The question hung heavy in the air. Claudine's lips tightened, her silence louder than denial. Selah swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She whispered, "Dad, this isn't fair." Malik placed a steadying hand on her arm. "I know." He turned back to Claudine, meeting her stare with calm steel. "We've given you everything you've asked for. We complied at the gate. We complied when boarding. We will not allow ourselves to be harassed." Claudine's voice sharpened. "If you refuse, I'll have to escalate this." "Escalate what?" Orion snapped. His eyes burned with a mix of anger and disbelief. "That we're sitting in the seats we paid for. That we're drinking juice and water like every other passenger here." Claudine's gaze cut toward him, cold and unyielding. "Tone, young man. Aggression will not help you." The words sliced deep. Orion felt his breath hitch, the implication heavy. Aggression, a word so often weaponized against young black men, as if passion were danger, as if standing up for dignity were violence. His fists clenched, but Malik's voice anchored him again. "Orion," Malik murmured softly. "Breathe. Inside." Malik's own thoughts churned. "She wants a reaction." "She wants us loud. Wants us unruly so she can call it justification. Not here. Not today. Patience is power." Diego Ramos appeared from the galley, sensing the storm. "Everything all right here?" His voice carried careful neutrality, but his eyes told a different story. He had seen enough to understand. Claudine handed him the clipboard. The system flagged their reservation. "I'm confirming identity." Diego glanced at the clipboard, confusion flickering. "I don't see any note of that." Claudine's eyes flashed. It was verbal. From the captain. Passengers stirred. The businessman muttered, "Strange. I've flown for 30 years and never seen this." The woman in row 3 whispered into her phone. "She's lying." Malik spoke clearly, his words measured. "We are not refusing to cooperate. We are refusing to be treated differently without cause. If there is a legitimate reason, state it. Otherwise, this stops now." Selah felt tears prick her eyes. She wanted to disappear, but she also wanted to scream. She clutched her mother's journal tighter, as if it could shield her. Her thoughts spiraled. "Why does this keep happening? Why do I feel guilty for existing in a space we belong to?" Orion's internal battle raged. Every statute, every civil rights case he had studied surfaced in his mind. He wanted to cite laws, to dismantle her reasoning, to force the truth into the open. But the quiet plea in his father's eyes kept him seated. Claudine's voice cut again. "If you cannot comply, I will file a report for suspicious conduct." The words struck like a blow. Malik inhaled slowly, choosing silence for a beat. Then he spoke, his voice calm, but carrying weight. "Suspicious conduct is refusing to follow the rules of respect. Suspicious conduct is weaponizing authority without reason. We have complied at every step. If you continue this, you are not following protocol. You are inventing it." The cabin fell silent. Even the sound of cutlery paused. Claudine's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Diego stepped in firmly. "Dr. Harrington, Orion, Selah, you've done nothing wrong. Please enjoy your flight. I'll make sure dinner's brought promptly." He turned to Claudine, his tone steady but pointed. "Let's step into the galley." Claudine hesitated, then finally retreated with him. The tension in the aisle eased, but the damage had been done. Malik sat back, his chest heavy, his children's faces etched with frustration and pain. Selah whispered, "Why us, Dad? Why does it always have to be us?" Malik looked at her, his voice soft, filled with both sorrow and strength. "Because the world is still learning to see us. But that doesn't mean we shrink. It means we rise." Orion shook his head. "I'm tired of rising. I just want to be treated like everyone else." Malik's throat tightened. He wanted that too, desperately. But he also knew the road was long. He closed his eyes briefly, hearing Danica's voice in memory. "Hold your ground, Malik. Not just for you, but for them." Dinner arrived. Diego returned with plates, setting them down gently, almost like an apology. The food sat untouched for a while. Selah pushed her fork around, appetite gone. Orion stared at the table, lost in thought. Malik forced himself to eat a few bites, not out of hunger, but to show his children they could continue, that one person's cruelty would not break them. Yet deep inside, he knew this was far from over. Claudine had not finished. The humiliation had only escalated, and the path ahead promised turbulence no seatbelt could hold down. The dinner trays were cleared, though hardly any food had been touched. The hum of the engines filled the silence between the Harringtons, heavy and unspoken. Malik leaned back, eyes closed briefly, trying to center himself. He could feel the storm gathering in Claudine's presence, even when she was out of sight. When she returned, the look on her face was sharper than before, her movements purposeful. She carried no tray, no clipboard, only the authority of her uniform and the arrogance of certainty. She stopped beside Malik's row and pressed the call button herself, summoning attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said loudly enough for passengers nearby to hear, "we may have a situation requiring additional verification." Heads turned. A ripple of unease spread across the cabin. Malik opened his eyes, his pulse steady but heavier now. Orion sat upright, bracing, while Selah's shoulders tightened. Her journal clutched protectively in her lap. "What situation?" Malik asked calmly. His voice carried quiet steel. Claudine adjusted her posture, tilting her chin as though addressing the entire cabin. "Not just the family. There has been suspicious behavior reported. For safety, I need to alert the captain and security team." Orion shot forward in his seat. "Suspicious behavior." "From us, you have got to be kidding." Passengers began whispering. A man in the third row frowned. What exactly did they do? A woman behind him shook her head, pulling out her phone. Selah's heart pounded in her ears. She felt exposed, her chest tight as if every eye in the cabin had turned into a spotlight. Suspicious. For sitting quietly, for existing in these seats. Malik held up his hand, his voice low but commanding. "Enough! You will not criminalize us for your prejudice. My children have done nothing. I have done nothing. This stops here." But Claudine ignored him. She reached for the interphone mounted on the bulkhead wall and spoke in clipped tones. Her words hushed, but audible enough. "Code 27. Possible security concern. Passenger verification required." The phrase struck like thunder. Code 27. Malik knew enough about aviation to understand. It was a discretionary alert, meant for potential threats, smugglers, or passengers behaving dangerously. The weight of that accusation was devastating. A scarlet letter broadcast through the crew. Selah gasped, whispering, "She called us a threat." Her voice cracked, tears spilling as she tried to wipe them away before anyone could see. Orion's fury blazed. "She's framing us. Dad, we can't just sit here. She's putting us in danger." Malik's heart hammered, but his exterior remained controlled. He leaned close to his children, speaking just above a whisper. "Listen to me. Do not move suddenly. Do not raise your voice. They are waiting for us to validate their story. We will not give them that." Around them, the cabin buzzed with unease. Some passengers exchanged uncertain looks, while others began recording discreetly. The businessman across the aisle shook his head slowly. "This is wrong," he muttered under his breath. Diego Ramos appeared quickly, his face pale. "Claudine, what are you doing? They haven't done anything." Claudine's eyes flicked sharply to him. "Procedure. Diego, step aside." "No," Diego said, louder now. His voice trembled but held. "I've served them. I've been here the whole time. They've done nothing but sit in their seats and eat dinner." Claudine glared at him, but before she could respond, the cockpit door clicked. The purser whispered to the captain through the crack, relaying the supposed alert. The hum of the engines seemed louder now, as if amplifying the weight of accusation. Malik felt the pressure on his chest grow heavier. He thought of Danica again, her voice steady in his memory. You promised to protect them, Malik? You promised? He looked at Orion and Sela. Orion's fists were tight, his chest rising fast, ready to stand. Sela's face was pale, her eyes glassy with fear. Malik reached for both their hands beneath the table, gripping firmly. "Stay with me," he whispered. "We walk through this together." Claudine turned back, her voice loud enough for the entire cabin. "Until the captain is satisfied, these passengers will be treated as a potential risk. I need everyone to remain calm and seated." Gasps filled the air. A mother pulled her child closer. A man in row 4 shook his head in disbelief. The woman with the phone whispered into her mic, "They're targeting this family. They've done nothing." Orion could no longer contain his voice. "This is harassment. Everyone here knows it. She's making this up because of how we look." Claudine's expression hardened. "Sir, sit down immediately, or I'll have you restrained." The words sliced through the cabin, heavy with menace. Sela broke into quiet sobs, pressing her face into her sleeve, wishing the seat could swallow her whole. Malik inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly, rising just enough in his seat to meet Claudine's eyes. His voice was low, but carried undeniable gravity. "If you continue this fabrication, you will regret it. Not because of me, but because the truth is louder than lies, and everyone here sees it." Passengers murmured their agreement. A man called out, "They haven't done a thing." Another added, "This is outrageous." Claudine's mask cracked, if only for a moment, before she turned sharply and disappeared into the galley. The tension lingered, thick and suffocating. Malik squeezed his children's hands again. His mind raced, weighing options. He could demand the captain's presence. He could call for legal counsel upon landing. He could remain silent and endure. But silence was never safety. It was complicity. Inside, he felt the conflict rise. If I speak too loud, I become their story of aggression. If I stay too quiet, I let them write us out of our own truth. Where is the line, Danica? Where is the balance between patience and resistance? Sela's quiet sobs broke his heart, each one a reminder of the cost of dignity. Orion's rage was equally painful, a fire Malik feared might consume him if left unchecked. He had to hold them both, to be the calm center of the storm, even as his own fury trembled beneath the surface. Passengers shifted again as Diego returned. Kneeling briefly beside Malik, "Dr. Harrington, I'm so sorry. She has no authority to call Code 27 without evidence. I'll testify to that, I swear." Malik nodded slowly, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Diego. Stay strong." The cabin settled into uneasy silence, but everyone knew the truth. The false alert had turned bias into accusation, transforming a family's dignity into a supposed threat. And though the engines carried them smoothly through the night sky, turbulence had already claimed the soul of the flight. The hum of the engines seemed louder than before, filling every pause in conversation with an oppressive weight. Claudine Mercer had vanished into the galley after making her announcement, but her shadow lingered in the air like a toxin. The passengers around the Harringtons shifted uneasily, whispering in low tones. Phones glowed in discreet hands, cameras angled just enough to capture without drawing too much attention. Orion sat forward, fists pressed against his knees. His breathing came in short bursts, controlled only by sheer force of will. Sela leaned against the window, tears drying on her cheeks, her mother's journal clutched against her chest like a shield. Malik sat between them, outwardly calm, inwardly raging against the storm he could not allow to break loose. Then Claudine returned. Her face was rigid, her voice official. We'll need to inspect your carry-on luggage. Now." The words dropped like stones. Passengers gasped audibly this time. One man muttered, "You've got to be kidding." A woman whispered into her phone, "They're escalating again." Malik raised his eyes to meet hers. His voice was steady, deliberate. "All of our luggage has already been screened. Twice. At security and again at boarding." Claudine's eyes did not waver. "We've received a directive from the captain to verify contents. Please place the bag on the tray table." Sela froze. Her backpack rested neatly beneath the seat, its contents simple and ordinary, a laptop, her notes, a sweatshirt, and her mother's journal. She looked at her father, panic flashing across her face. "Dad." Why? Malik touched her arm gently. "Because she wants us to break." "But we won't." Orion growled low under his breath. "This is humiliating," Claudine repeated. Louder this time. "Place the bag on the tray." Passengers began recording openly now. A businessman said firmly, "This is unnecessary. We all saw them board." Another voice chimed in, "There's no reason for this." Diego Ramos appeared at Claudine's shoulder, his face pale with frustration. "Claudine, this is going too far." "The captain didn't order this." "You know it." Claudine shot him a withering glare. "Stand down. Diego, this isn't your call." But Malik had already reached down, lifting Sela's backpack with calm precision. He set it gently on the tray table, unzipped it slowly, and folded back the flap. The cabin leaned in collectively, as though the truth inside the bag carried the weight of a verdict. Sela's belongings were revealed one by one. A well-worn Harvard hoodie folded neatly, a laptop plastered with stickers from neuroscience conferences, a slim stack of textbooks with highlighted margins, and at the very top, her mother's journal leather-bound, corners softened with years of touch, a ribbon marking the last page Danica had ever written. Claudine's eyes flicked across the items. She tried to maintain her composure, but the silence in the cabin told the story she could not control. Passengers murmured, their disbelief loud enough to shatter her authority. "That's it," someone said aloud. "A sweatshirt and some books." A woman shook her head. "This is harassment." The businessman across the aisle leaned forward, voice firm. "You've put them through humiliation for a backpack full of notebooks." Sela's face burned as she clutched the journal closer, afraid Claudine might reach for it. Malik placed a hand protectively over hers, shielding the journal as if guarding a sacred relic. He turned his gaze back to Claudine, his voice quiet but piercing. "This is what you call suspicious a sweatshirt and a journal. This is the evidence you've built your case on." The silence was thick. Claudine's jaw tightened, but she offered no reply. Orion leaned forward, unable to hold back. "You dragged us through humiliation for nothing. Everyone here saw it." His voice shook, not from fear, but from fury. "You tried to paint us as criminals when all we're carrying is memory." Sela's whisper broke through, fragile but sharp. "You wanted to shame us, but all you did was expose yourself." The cabin erupted in murmurs of agreement. Phones recorded steadily now. Passengers no longer tried to hide their disgust. Malik's heart swelled with pride for his children, even as his chest ached with the weight of the moment. He had seen this before, in different forms on streets, in offices, in whispers that turned to accusations, but here, in this enclosed skyborne chamber, it was magnified for all to witness. Claudine's composure cracked further. "This was standard procedure," she muttered, though the words sounded weak. "No," Malik replied firmly. This was bias masquerading as procedure, and the difference is clear to everyone in this cabin. Diego stepped forward, his voice strong now. I'll be reporting this. You can't keep hiding behind the uniform. Claudine, not anymore. The woman with the phone raised her voice from row 3. This is on video. It's going live right now. Claudine's face paled. Her eyes darted across the cabin, meeting stares filled with anger, disappointment, and judgment. Authority had slipped from her grasp, and she knew it. Selah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. For the first time that flight, her shoulders straightened. The journal in her lap no longer felt like a shield. It felt like a banner, proof of resilience. Malik closed the backpack slowly, each movement deliberate. He slid it back under the seat, then folded his hands atop the tray table. His eyes locked with Claudine's, calm but unyielding. The truth is heavier than your accusations, and the truth always lands. The engines roared outside, steady against the silence within. Passengers continued to murmur, their voices carrying the verdict Claudine could not escape. She turned abruptly and retreated into the galley once more, her authority fractured beyond repair. Malik exhaled slowly, turning to his children. You see, they tried to strip our dignity, but they only revealed theirs. Orion nodded, though his jaw was still tight. I just want accountability. Dad, I want her to face consequences for this. And she will, Malik said, but not by our rage, by our patience, and by the eyes that have witnessed the truth. Selah's hand trembled as she touched the journal. Mom would have hated this, she whispered, but she'd be proud we didn't let it break us. Malik's throat tightened. He kissed the top of her head softly. She is proud. Right now. The cabin settled again, but the atmosphere was transformed. Witnesses had seen. Voices had spoken. Cameras had recorded. The lie had collapsed, replaced by truth, sitting plain in the open, above the endless stretch of clouds. Malik knew this was no longer just about his family. It was about something larger, an indictment of a system that allowed bias to wear the mask of authority. And though the night sky stretched infinite beyond the windows, inside the cabin, light had begun to break through. The cabin had fallen into a tense quiet after the bag inspection. The reveal of ordinary belongings had left Claudine exposed. Her accusations dissolved in front of 100 watchful eyes. Yet the silence was not relief. It was the silence before something breaks open. Malik Harrington knew this instinctively. He had heard it in operating rooms, felt it in boardrooms, lived it in moments when dignity hung by a thread. Selah leaned back against the window, wiping her cheeks, her mother's journal still pressed to her lap. Orion sat rigid, his jaw tight, scanning the cabin as though memorizing every witness, every angle of every phone recording. Malik himself sat with his hands folded neatly, a surgeon's discipline, though inside him the weight of grief and fury pressed like stone. Then a voice rose from the aisle. A woman stood, elegant but firm. Her phone still in her hand, she looked directly at Claudine, who had re-emerged from the galley, her face flushed but still clinging to a brittle authority. "My name is Camille Wright," the woman announced, her voice carrying across the cabin. "I am a civil rights attorney, and I have been documenting every moment of this." A murmur swept through the rows. Heads turned. Claudine stiffened, her lips parting as though to speak. But Camille continued before she could respond. "What I have witnessed is harassment," Camille said, "targeting a family with repeated checks, humiliating them with a false security alert, and now this bag inspection without cause. This is discrimination, clear and undeniable. Passengers nodded. Some clapped softly. Others voiced their agreement. The businessman across the aisle leaned back with satisfaction, muttering. Finally, someone saying it out loud. Claudine tried to gather her authority. "Ma'am, I must ask you to remain seated and refrain from interfering with crew operations." Camille's gaze was unflinching. "The only interference I see is yours. You've interfered with this family's right to travel in peace. And you've interfered with the dignity of every passenger here by forcing us to witness this charade." Diego Ramos stepped forward, his voice quiet but strong. "She's right. Claudine, I tried to stop this earlier. You went too far." Claudine's eyes narrowed. "Careful. Diego, you know what this means for your record." Diego's jaw tightened, but he did not waver. Some things are bigger than records. Sela watched with wide eyes, her tears replaced by something new, the stirrings of hope. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt less alone. Orion sat taller, energy surging as he realized the narrative was shifting. Camille turned to Malik and his children. Her voice softened, carrying a note of solidarity. "You don't need to defend yourselves anymore. People see the truth. I see the truth." Malik inclined his head, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Thank you." But Claudine was not finished. Her pride, her control, her authority they were unraveling, and she clung to them with desperate hands. "All of you need to understand," she snapped. "This is about safety. If anything happens because I ignored protocol, it will be on me." A passenger from row 4 spoke up. "What safety? They were just sitting here." Another added, "I've flown enough to know this isn't protocol. It's prejudice." Phones were held higher now. Claudine looked around and realized the cabin itself had turned against her. The audience was no longer silent, no longer complicit. Malik leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying the gravity of truth. "Safety is sacred. I know it better than most. I hold people's lives in my hands every day in the operating room. I know what vigilance means. But what you are doing here is not vigilance. It is violence in another form." The words struck deeply, echoing in the cabin. Even those who had remained quiet shifted with recognition. A woman whispered, "He's a doctor." The revelation cut through whatever seeds of doubt Claudine had planted. Sela sat up straighter, her voice trembling but determined. "All I had in my bag was my mother's journal. That's what she called suspicious. Memory. Love. That's what she tried to shame me for." Passengers gasped softly. One woman pressed a hand to her chest. A man shook his head in disgust. Claudine's lips parted, but no words came. Orion added, his voice sharp but steady. "And she called me aggressive because I spoke up. That's how bias works. It twists truth until our defense becomes their excuse." The cabin filled with low voices of agreement. The tide had turned. Camille raised her phone higher. "This is all being recorded. Miss Mercer. And when this flight lands, it will not disappear. The world will see it." Claudine's face drained of color. For the first time, uncertainty cracked her mask. Diego placed a hand gently on Malik's shoulder. "You're not alone. We'll make sure the truth gets out." Malik's throat tightened with gratitude. He looked at Sela and Orion, their eyes shining with a mix of fear and resolve. He thought again of Danica, of her unyielding belief that justice comes when truth refuses to stay quiet. The captain's voice came over the intercom then, breaking the tension momentarily. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cruising at 35,000 feet. Smooth skies ahead. Please remain seated while the crew completes service. Smooth skies outside. Storm inside. Camille sat back down, but kept her phone recording, her eyes never leaving Claudine. Other passengers did the same. The balance of power in the cabin had shifted. What was once Claudine's stage had become her trial. Selah whispered to her father, "Do you think she'll stop now?" Malik squeezed her hand. "No. People like her don't stop until they're forced to, but she's already lost." Orion leaned closer, whispering fiercely, "And when we land, she's going to face real consequences." Malik did not reply. He only sat back, breathing steadily, his eyes fixed on the aisle where Claudine had stood. He knew the story was no longer just theirs. It had become everyone's. The witnesses had stepped forward. The truth had been spoken aloud, and truth has a way of growing wings once it takes flight. The murmurs in the cabin had not stopped since Camille Wright declared herself a civil rights lawyer. Claudine Mercer's authority had fractured, and yet she lingered near the galley like a shadow refusing to retreat. Malik Harrington sat steady in his seat, though his heart still pressed heavily against his ribs. Selah leaned on his shoulder now, her breathing calmer but eyes still swollen from tears. Orion kept his gaze fixed on the aisle, restless, burning for resolution. Then the curtain between first class and the cockpit area shifted. A man stepped out, silver hair neatly combed, his navy blazer immaculate. He carried himself with quiet power, not the forced authority of Claudine's posturing, but the kind of presence that makes people sit up straighter without knowing why. Several passengers recognized him instantly. Preston Aldridge, Chief Executive Officer of the airline, traveling unannounced on this very flight. The whispers spread quickly. "That's him, the CEO." Phones lifted higher. Even Camille tilted her camera to capture his approach. Claudine straightened immediately, her posture snapping into rigid form. Relief flashed briefly across her face, as though salvation had walked through the curtain. "Mr. Aldridge," she began quickly, "thank you for coming forward." "I was handling a situation of potential." Preston raised a hand, silencing her mid-sentence. His voice was calm but carried weight like iron beneath velvet. "I've been watching." The words cut sharper than any reprimand. Claudine froze, her mouth half open. Preston's eyes swept the cabin, pausing briefly on the Harrington family. He had seen enough. "I have been in this business for 3 decades, Preston said, his voice even but steady enough for every ear in the cabin to catch. "I know the difference between vigilance and harassment. What I've witnessed here tonight is not vigilance." Gasps and murmurs of approval rippled through the passengers. Orion sat taller, a flicker of vindication in his eyes. Selah's lips parted in disbelief, her journal clutched tightly against her chest. Malik remained steady, his gaze fixed on Preston, studying him carefully. Preston turned back to Claudine. "You will step aside. Now." Her face flushed deep crimson. "Sir, I was only following protocol." The captain authorized no. Preston interrupted, his tone sharper. "I spoke to the captain myself. He authorized nothing of the sort. You have exceeded your authority, and in doing so, you have humiliated not only this family, but this entire airline." The cabin erupted in soft applause. Someone whispered, "Finally!" Another said aloud, "About time." Claudine's hands trembled at her sides. "I was trying to protect safety," she muttered weakly. "Safety is not an excuse for prejudice," Preston replied firmly. His voice did not rise, yet it carried undeniable finality. "You have placed this airline at risk. You have placed our passengers at risk. and you have failed to honor the dignity of those in your care." Camille spoke up from her seat, her voice steady. "Miss Aldridge, everything has been documented. This family has endured repeated humiliation without cause." Preston inclined his head respectfully, "And I will see to it that the record is corrected." He turned back to Claudine. "Gather your things. You are relieved of duty. Effective immediately." A stunned silence followed. Passengers looked at one another in disbelief. Firing a crew member mid-flight was unheard of, but Preston's face showed no hesitation. Claudine's mouth opened, then closed. She looked as if she wanted to protest, but the weight of witnesses, cameras, and the CEO himself left her no ground to stand on. With stiff movements, she turned and vanished into the galley, her footsteps heavy with defeat. Selah let out a breath she had been holding for hours. Orion leaned back, his fist loosening at last. Malik exhaled slowly, steady even in relief, his hand resting on Selah's shoulder. Preston stepped closer to their row. His expression softened as he looked directly at Malik. "Dr. Harrington, Miss Harrington, Mr. Harrington, on behalf of this airline, I apologize. What you have endured tonight is unacceptable." Salah's voice cracked. "You knew you saw everything." "Yes," Preston said quietly, "and I should have stepped in sooner. That is my failing, not yours." Orion's eyes narrowed. "Apologies don't erase what she tried to do to us." "No," Preston admitted. "They do not. But accountability is the beginning, and accountability will come." Malik studied him for a long moment. His instincts as a surgeon, as a father, as a man who had endured too many polite apologies without change, all of them weighed heavily. "Words are easy at 35,000 feet, he said finally. "Change is harder when wheels are on the ground." Preston nodded solemnly. "You're right, but I intend to prove this is more than words." The passengers applauded again, louder this time. The businessman across the aisle said, "Good. It's about time someone at the top took responsibility." Camille lowered her phone briefly, her eyes on Malik. "This is bigger than one flight," she said softly. Malik nodded. He knew it too. His children's eyes told him they knew it. The stain on Selah's sweater, the word aggressive aimed at Orion, the false code 27, all of it would live far beyond this night. Preston placed a hand lightly on Malik's seat. "Dr. Harrington, I give you my word. This will not be buried." Malik's gaze did not waver. "See that it isn't. For my children, for every passenger who doesn't have a lawyer in the next seat or a CEO on the plane." Preston held his eyes for a moment longer, then gave a small nod and stepped back. His presence lingered, but the cabin slowly returned to motion. Diego returned with fresh towels for Selah, his face calmer now that the storm had broken. Camille lowered her phone, though the light of its camera had already done its work. Selah leaned into her father, whispering, "Do you think it's really over?" Malik kissed her temple gently. "No, but tonight we've seen something important. The truth can corner even power when enough eyes refuse to look away." Orion exhaled deeply, his shoulders loosening. "For once, Dad, I think justice actually boarded this flight." Malik closed his eyes briefly, hearing Danica's voice again in memory. "Hold your ground. Malik, the truth will always land with you." And as the aircraft continued across the Atlantic, the cabin carried more than passengers. It carried a story that would not be silenced, a story ready to descend with them into the world below. The cabin carried a different energy now. Claudine Mercer was gone from sight, tucked into the galley with her uniform stripped of authority. Preston Aldridge's words had shifted the weight of the room, But the silence that followed was not empty. It was alive, filled with passengers processing what they had just witnessed. Phones glowed across the first-class cabin, videos replayed in real time, screens showing Selah's stained sweater, the false code 27, the bag inspection that revealed nothing but notebooks and a journal. In seat 3A, the woman who had streamed since boarding whispered to her phone with urgency. "This is live. We just watched a family profiled and harassed on this flight, and the CEO himself had to step in. Share this. People need to see." Her words traveled faster than the aircraft itself. Within minutes, feeds lit up with comments, shares, and outrage. The story was no longer confined to the cabin. It was spilling into the world below, alive and spreading. Selah glanced nervously at the phones around her. "Dad, they're filming everything. It's going everywhere." Malik squeezed her hand gently. "Let them. Truth is strongest when it's witnessed." Orion leaned forward, his own phone in his hand. He wasn't streaming, but he scrolled through feeds with a clenched jaw. Already he saw hashtags forming, fragments of the story picking up speed. His anger found shape now, not just a private fire, but a public narrative. "They're calling it flight for dignity," he murmured. Camille Wright glanced over. "It will spread. Stories like this always do. And once they're out, they can't be put back in the bottle." Diego approached with bottled water for the family. His voice was soft. "People are on your side. I can feel it. No one is buying her story anymore." Malik thanked him with a nod. His own thoughts churned as he listened to the whispers and the clicks of cameras. For years he had balanced silence and speech, choosing carefully when to respond to injustice. But tonight, the choice was being made for him. The story had wings now, and whether he wanted it or not, he and his children were at the center of it. A man in row 2 raised his voice. "Dr. Harrington, would you mind if I spoke?" He introduced himself as Richard Bennett, a professor traveling to Paris for a lecture. He turned to the cabin. "We have all witnessed what happened. We saw the targeting, the escalation, the humiliation. This family deserves our support, not just online but here, now." Passengers murmured their agreement. Some nodded. A woman added, "We should sign something, a statement, while it's fresh." Camille lifted her hand. Phone still recording. "I can draft it. A declaration of what we witnessed, signed by every willing passenger. It will hold weight in court and in the court of public opinion." Selah blinked, overwhelmed. "You'd really do that?" "For us," Camille smiled gently. "For all of us. Because if it can happen to you, it can happen to anyone. But tonight, we saw it. We cannot pretend we didn't." The businessman across the aisle tapped his pen against a napkin. "I'll sign first." Soon. A sheet of airline stationery was passed row to row. Passengers scrawling their names, their seat numbers, their outrage condensed into ink. Phones recorded the process, voices narrating what they had witnessed. The power of the moment grew, not from anger alone, but from solidarity. Orion's chest swelled with something he hadn't expected. For once, his fire was not isolated. He was not the lone voice crying against injustice. He was part of a chorus. "They're with us," he whispered. Selah still trembled slightly, but her eyes softened. She leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "Maybe this time, it won't just disappear." Malik held them close, his heart heavy with both pride and caution. He knew how fast narratives could shift. One headline could turn truth into distortion. But tonight felt different. The cameras were not hostile. The witnesses were not silent. Preston Aldridge reappeared briefly, standing at the front of the cabin. I want every passenger to know your voices will be heard. This family has been wronged, and as CEO, I will not allow this to be swept aside. When we land, there will be accountability. Applause filled the cabin again. The sound was not loud enough to rival the engines, but it was strong, resolute, undeniable. Claudine remained unseen in the galley, but her presence still haunted the space. Malik thought about her, not with pity but with clarity. She had chosen her path, step by step. Each act of prejudice disguised as procedure until it stripped her of credibility. He wondered if she realized yet that her downfall had not come from him raising his voice, but from witnesses refusing to stay silent. Camille leaned closer to Malik. Dr. Harrington, when this lands, I'll represent you if you want it. But more than that, I want you to know something. You didn't just endure. You showed grace under fire, and people saw that. Your children saw that. That matters. Malik's throat tightened. He looked at Orion and Selah, their faces illuminated by the glow of passenger phones. They had carried fear, humiliation, rage, but they had also carried dignity. That was what would endure. The hours passed slowly, the Atlantic stretching endless below. The cabin lights dimmed for rest, but the passengers of first class did not sleep easily. Phones stayed active. Statements were drafted. Signatures gathered. Truth was being recorded in real time, each witness adding their piece. Selah opened her journal briefly, her pen trembling as she wrote a single line in the margin. Even when the sky is heavy, dignity can fly. She closed it quickly, hugging it to her chest again. Orion whispered to her, "Someday, we'll tell this story ourselves, not as victims, but as proof." She nodded softly. Malik listened to them, his heart swelling despite the ache. He thought again of Danica, her absence more piercing than ever. She would have been proud of their resilience, of their strength. He whispered to himself, "We're still standing, love, still standing." By the time the cabin settled, the story had already left the plane. On the ground thousands of miles away, screens lit up with outrage, support, debate. Hashtags spread like fire across platforms. The power was no longer just in the airline's hands. It was in the passengers' hands, in the witnesses who refused silence, in the world watching with sharpened eyes. And high above the ocean, Malik closed his eyes briefly, gripping the hands of his children. The engines roared steady. The truth was airborne now, unstoppable. The night stretched on, the cabin cloaked in a restless quiet. Some passengers dozed, their heads tilted awkwardly against headrests, but most remained alert, their screens glowing as the story of the flight traveled far ahead of them. Malik sat between his children, his eyes closed, though sleep never came. He felt Orion's restless energy on one side, Selah's quiet trembling on the other. His role as anchor had never been heavier. As dawn brushed the horizon in pale streaks of orange and pink, the intercom chimed. The captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into Paris shortly. Please fasten your seat belts and prepare for landing." The words should have brought relief, but Malik felt the tension rise instead. Descent meant confrontation. Descent meant the safe cocoon of the sky would give way to ground, where cameras, officials, and corporate machinery would be waiting. Selah looked out the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Dad, what's going to happen when we land?" Malik reached for her hand. "Whatever comes, we face it together. We've already endured the worst of the storm." Orion's voice was sharper. "No, The worst is when they try to spin it, to bury it. We have to make sure that doesn't happen." Malik nodded slowly. "And we will. But remember, truth is our ally. We don't need to shout to be heard anymore. The world is already listening." The wheels touched down with a jolt. The engines roared as the aircraft slowed along the runway, and the cabin filled with that familiar shift of bodies leaning forward in their seats. But in this cabin, the shift carried more than physical force. It carried expectation. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Preston Aldridge reappeared. He stood at the front, his face lined with fatigue, but steady with resolve. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said clearly, "I want you to remain calm during disembarkation. There will be media present, as well as ground staff. I ask for your patience, but I also want to say again that your voices matter. What happened here will not be hidden." The cabin responded with applause, not raucous but steady, filled with conviction. Phones lifted again, recording his words. Claudine was nowhere in sight. When the seatbelt sign finally clicked off, the real turbulence began. The curtain at the front parted, and through the windows passengers could see the flashing lights of cameras and crews gathering at the jet bridge. Security officers stood ready, not with menace, but with authority tempered by caution. Selah's heart raced. Everyone's out there. Malik's hand rested on her shoulder. "Breathe. Hold your head high. We walk out with dignity." Orion's jaw set. Dignity and truth. The door opened. A rush of cool air entered, carrying with it the muffled roar of voices waiting outside. One by one, passengers began to file out, but many paused near Malik's row. They stopped to place a hand on his shoulder, to whisper encouragement, to remind him and his children that they were not alone. The stationary statement, signed by rows of passengers, was tucked into Camille Wright's briefcase, ready for whatever awaited. When their turn came, Malik rose first, tall and composed. Selah clutched her journal against her chest, Orion close at her side. Diego Ramos stepped into the aisle with them, offering a quiet nod of solidarity. Camille followed, her phone still recording. The jet bridge was a gauntlet of flashing lights. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust out like weapons of curiosity. Voices overlapped. "Dr. Harrington, how do you respond to the allegations, Selah? What was in your bag, Orion? Were you threatened with restraint, Mr. Aldridge? Is the airline prepared to fire the attendant?" Malik raised a hand gently, steadying the flood. His voice carried above the noise, calm but powerful. "We have nothing to hide. We endured humiliation at 35,000 feet, but we did not break. The truth has already been witnessed by every passenger here and by everyone watching now. This is not about one family. This is about the dignity every traveler deserves." Applause rose from behind as fellow passengers exited, some raising their voices to confirm his words. "He's telling the truth. We saw it all. They were targeted for no reason." Cameras swung toward them, capturing the solidarity, the faces of ordinary people who refused silence. Preston Aldridge stepped forward then, shielding the family from the crush of microphones. His voice was measured, official. "As CEO of this airline, I state clearly what happened on this flight was unacceptable. We will not defend discrimination. We will not bury accountability. The crew member involved has been relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending full investigation." Gaffes and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Reporters shouted follow-up questions, cameras flashing like lightning. Selah pressed closer to her father, her journal held tightly, her eyes wide but steady. Orion straightened his back, meeting the cameras head-on, unafraid now. Malik held both their hands, a picture of resolve in the storm of attention. Camille raised her voice above the noise. The witnesses have signed statements. This family is not standing alone. Every passenger here saw the truth, and we will ensure it cannot be silenced. The jet bridge swelled with sound, a chorus of voices clashing. But at the center, the Harringtons stood like anchors. Malik spoke once more, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of something larger than himself. We did not ask to be the story tonight, but if our pain can prevent another family from suffering the same, then it will not be in vain. Dignity is not a privilege. It is a right. The words cut through the chaos, echoed in the recordings, repeated in the murmurs of passengers behind them. As they moved forward, guided by security toward a quieter corridor, Salah whispered, "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud?" Malik's throat tightened. He looked at her, at Orion, at the world that had just shifted around them. "She is," he said softly. "Every step we take with dignity is her pride living on." The cameras continued to flash, but the family walked steadily. Their truth carried not just in their own voices, but in the voices of those who had witnessed. And as they disappeared from the jet bridge into the awaiting terminal, the world outside surged with a story that would not be contained. The Paris morning was crisp, sunlight slanting across the glass of the airline's European headquarters. Inside, a conference room stretched wide with polished oak, its windows overlooking the runways where planes ascended and descended like clockwork. But within the walls, order was absent. The air buzzed with tension as executives shuffled papers, glanced nervously at phones, and whispered to one another about the flight that had ignited overnight. Preston Aldridge sat at the head of the table, his face drawn but composed. His blazer was the same one he had worn on the flight, though it seemed heavier now, burdened by the weight of what he knew was coming. To his right sat Evelyn Cross, Vice President of Operations, her sharp eyes betraying the restless mind behind them. Camille Wright was there too, invited as both witness and counsel, her presence an unspoken reminder that this was not just an internal matter. And at the far end, Malik Harrington and his children sat quietly, a family thrust into the center of a storm they had not chosen. Screens along the walls flickered with live footage. News anchors debated heatedly. Comment sections scrolled endlessly across the ticker. Hashtags trended in bold letters. Air Flight for Dignity. Oh, Sky Justice. Not just turbulence. The world was watching. Preston tapped the table once, calling the room to order. "We all know why we're here. What happened last night is no longer confined to a single cabin. It's everywhere. We have a crisis not just of perception, but of principle." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice crisp. "The footage shows clear misconduct. The false security code, the repeated harassment, the baseless bag check. Claudine Mercer crossed every line of protocol. She's already been relieved of duty, but termination will be immediate." Camille's voice cut in, calm but unyielding. "This isn't just about one attendant. If you stop at scapegoating her, the system remains untouched." The passengers signed statements. They testified to a culture, not just a moment. Preston nodded grimly. "I agree. Which is why we need to discuss reforms. But before we do, I want to hear from the people most affected." All eyes turned to Malik. He sat tall, his hands folded loosely on the table. His children flanked him, Orion's jaw tight, Selah clutching her journal even here, as though the leather-bound book was both shield and sword. Malik's voice was steady, deliberate. What we endured was not a misunderstanding. It was not one employee's poor judgment. It was the expression of a system that allows bias to disguise itself as vigilance. My daughter was humiliated for carrying her mother's journal. My son was branded aggressive for speaking the truth. And I was forced to prove, over and over, that we belonged in seats we paid for. The room was silent. The weight of his words pressed down like stone. Orion leaned forward, his fire undeniable. If the CEO hadn't been on board, we might have been dragged off that flight. Don't pretend otherwise. You've seen it happen to others. Selah's voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. I felt like I was shrinking into nothing, like no matter what I said or did, it wouldn't matter, because I wasn't seen, not as a student, not as a daughter, not as a person, just as a problem. Her words pierced the executives around the table. Evelyn's eyes softened, though her expression remained professional. Preston's jaw tightened. Camille placed her hands flat on the table. You've heard their truth. Now the question is, what will you do with it? You can announce another round of sensitivity training, publish a press release, and hope the fire dies down. Or you can recognize this moment for what it is, a turning point. An older board member cleared his throat nervously. We must consider financial implications. Stock has already dipped 6% this morning. Sponsors are calling. Malik turned his gaze toward him, calm but cutting. If your only concern is the market, you will lose both money and integrity. But if you lead with principle, if you prove to the world that dignity is not for sale, the market will follow, Orion added sharply. People don't want apologies anymore. They want proof. They want to see consequences and change. Selah clutched her journal tighter, whispering, they want to know it won't happen again. Evelyn shifted forward. Then let's make it so. We need independent oversight, not internal reports buried under bureaucracy. We need a complaint system that escalates directly to leadership. We need accountability tied to executive bonuses, so discrimination costs more than press releases. Camille nodded. And legal frameworks. Every incident documented. Every outcome transparent. Otherwise, the public will see through this faster than any PR campaign. Preston listened. His hands steepled beneath his chin. He looked at Malik, then at his children, then at the screens filled with headlines and hashtags. Finally, he spoke. We will build this into our structure. An independent ethics board. Real-time reporting directly to my office and to Evelyn's. Bias and de-escalation training led by experts. Not checkbox modules. Public metrics released quarterly. And immediate termination for proven discriminatory behavior. No exceptions. The room stirred. Some executives exchanged uneasy looks. Others nodded slowly. Camille pressed further. And restitution. This family deserves more than words. Preston turned back to Malik. Dr. Harrington, what do you seek? Malik paused, choosing carefully. His voice was low, but carried to every corner of the room. I don't want hush money. I don't want a settlement that vanishes into silence. I want a fund dedicated to supporting young people who dream of flying, studying, building futures in aviation and science. In my wife's name. She believed in opening doors. Let this tragedy force them open. Selah's eyes filled with tears. Her journal pressed against her heart. Orion's jaw relaxed slightly, pride flickering through his anger. Preston nodded, his voice solemn. Then it will be done. The Danica Harrington Dignity Fund. Initial investment. $10 million. Open to expansion. Publicly announced today. The room murmured in shock. Camille's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile. Malik closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of Danica's memory settle. into something lasting. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice steady. And let this not be the end, but the beginning. A culture shift, not a one-time gesture. Malik opened his eyes. Culture changes when silence breaks. Last night, silence broke. Do not let it return. The room sat in contemplative silence. Outside, planes lifted into the sky, their engines roaring with purpose. Inside, a family's pain had ignited a reckoning, and the echoes of their truth promised to ripple far beyond this boardroom. The boardroom reckoning had ended, but the story was only beginning its journey into the wider world. By the afternoon, headlines stretched across every major outlet. Clips of the cabin confrontation were replayed endlessly on television and across social media. The signatures of passengers, the steady voice of Camille Wright, the quiet dignity of Malik Harrington, and the trembling courage of Sella and Orion, all of it formed a narrative too powerful to dismiss. Malik sat with his children in a quiet lounge after the meeting, the bustle of the airport muffled beyond glass walls. Sella rested against her father's side, her journal open across her lap, pen tapping as though she longed to capture every detail, but struggled to find words. Orion paced near the window, restless, the fire in him still burning, though tempered by something new, a sense of purpose. "Do you think they'll really follow through?" Salah asked softly. Malik brushed a hand across her hair. "They will, because the world is watching now, and because we won't let them forget." Orion stopped pacing, turning sharply. "I don't just want them to fix the airline. I want this to mean something bigger. For every kid who's ever been told they don't belong." Malik met his gaze, seeing the determination in his son's eyes. It reminded him of Danica, her fierce belief that injustice was never too small to confront. "Then that is what the fund will be. Not just a response, but a doorway." Camille entered the lounge then, her briefcase in hand. "The fund is being announced in less than an hour. The press conference will be global. Preston Aldridge himself will stand beside you. Malik, they want you to speak too." Salah sat up straighter, startled. "Dad, you don't have to. You've done enough." Malik's eyes softened. "No, my love. This isn't about enough. It's about finishing what began in that cabin. The truth is ours to tell." An aide appeared at the door. "They're ready." The family rose together, walking down the corridor toward the press hall. Cameras awaited them, lights blazing, reporters clustered like waves ready to crash. Preston Aldridge stood at the podium, Evelyn Cross at his side, both faces solemn. When Malik stepped forward, the room quieted. He did not need to raise his voice. His calm carried weight enough. "Last night," he began, "my children and I boarded a flight expecting only to travel. Instead, we were profiled, humiliated, and branded as a threat for no reason beyond bias. But what could have remained a private wound was transformed by the courage of witnesses. Passengers refused silence. A lawyer stood. A crew member resisted complicity. And the world listened. Cameras clicked rapidly. The silence of the hall was reverent. Malik continued, "This is not just our story. It belongs to every traveler who has felt unseen, unheard, or unwanted. It belongs to every young person who has been told that dignity is conditional. We say today that it is not. Dignity is not granted by uniform or title. It is inherent. It is owed." Orion and Sella stood behind him, their presence a testament to the weight of his words. "And so," Malik said, "together with the airline, we established the Danica Harrington Dignity Fund, a $10 million commitment to ensure that young people of every background can pursue futures in aviation, science, and beyond. This is not hush money. This is not charity. This is justice carried forward. My wife believed in opening doors. Let her name open doors that bias once tried to close. Applause filled the hall. Some reporters lowered their cameras, overcome by the power of the moment. Evelyn Cross blinked rapidly, holding back tears. Preston Aldridge nodded solemnly, acknowledging both the pain and the promise. When Malik stepped back, Sela gripped his hand tightly, her eyes shimmering. Orion stood taller, pride burning where anger once raged. The fun became news within hours. But more importantly, the story refused to fade. Within days, airlines across the industry announced reviews of their own policies. Transportation officials called for hearings. The words spoken in that cabin, dignity, safety, truth, echoed far beyond its walls. Weeks later, Malik returned home with his children. The house was quiet, but the silence carried Danica's memory like a soft heartbeat. Sela sat at her desk, writing in her mother's journal, her words flowing steady at last. Orion filled applications for law internships, citing civil rights as his focus. Malik sat in his study, papers spread before him, working on proposals to expand the fund's reach. One evening, Sela read aloud from the journal. Even when the sky is heavy, dignity can fly. Malik closed his eyes, hearing his wife's voice in those words. She's with us, he said softly. Every step, months later, at a ceremony unveiling the first scholarship recipients of the fund. Malik watched as young students took the stage, their faces bright with hope. Sela stood among them, a mentor now, her journal in hand. Orion spoke to the crowd about justice, his fire now sharpened into purpose. When Malek addressed the gathering, his voice carried not just as a father or a doctor, but as a man who had walked through humiliation and emerged with truth intact. What began on a plane has taken flight in the world, he said. Prejudice tried to confine us, but solidarity carried us further. Let this remind us all when we stand together. Dignity is unstoppable. The audience rose in applause, not polite but thunderous, not fleeting but lasting. Malik felt the presence of Danica in that sound, her dream alive in every voice, every hand clapping, every young person stepping toward a future once threatened by silence. As the ceremony closed, Malik looked at his children, their faces radiant with strength. He thought of the night sky above the Atlantic, of the storm that became a turning point, and he whispered to himself words that had guided him through it all. The truth always lands, and in that moment, surrounded by hope, he knew it had. Sometimes injustice tries to hide in uniforms, in procedures, in quiet acts of humiliation carried out behind closed doors. But this story reminds us that truth cannot be silenced when dignity stands firm, when witnesses speak, and when love holds its ground. Dr. Malik Harrington and his children showed us that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right, and it is worth defending even in the most hostile skies. We leave this story carrying both pain and hope-pain for the prejudice that still exists, but hope in the strength that can turn humiliation into change. May it remind us to treat every person with respect, to stand against bias wherever we see it, and to believe that love and justice can reshape even the coldest of systems. If this story moved you, let it live beyond the screen. Share it, talk about it, and most of all, join us on this journey by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and turning on notifications so you'll be here for the next story, because voices like these deserve to be heard.